Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar, BrightGen Spring 23 Salesforce Release Highlights webinar. I'm your host, as usual, Keir Bowden, and I think we'll just get cracking straight away. If there are any stragglers, they get offered the recording after the event anyway. So let's press on. So here's what we're going to be covering today. I won't go through them individually, as I'm fairly sure you can read as well as I can. So our usual first topic is fond farewells, where we wave goodbye to those features that are going to live on a farm in the country. First off, asynchronous sockle leaves us in this release. If you haven't used it, this targeted big objects, field audit trail, and the Connect REST API. But you can achieve the same results using the bulk API or batch Apex going forward. And API versions 21 to 30 will retire in the next release, which is currently scheduled for June. So these are currently deprecated. But after the summer release, what they're going to do is they're going to error. So make sure that you update anything connecting to these API versions, otherwise your integrations, I'm afraid, will break. We've got a few retirements this time. Actually, we don't normally go on to a second page, but accessing the Salesforce mobile app via a community license is also going in the summer release. If you didn't use that, what this meant was that you could use the Salesforce mobile app in the same way you would the internal, but you could use a community license. Problem with that was the communities are normally quite heavily styled. And the mobile application doesn't change its layout or anything. It's not a responsive design platform in that way. So you'd have them styled so they'd look good on a website, but when that's in a web view in a container inside a mobile application, that really didn't look great. So that's been retired. So the advice is to purchase a platform subscription, which of course it is, because that costs a fair bit more money. And I'd also expect that to have some impact on your sharing rules if you're going to allow external people who used to use a community license to access via a platform license. So make sure you consider those first. And if you need any help with that, make sure to contact your friendly service manager. Salesforce Outlook goes in summer 24. The advice is to move to the Outlook integration products, potentially combined with Einstein activity capture. And something that I'm surprised hasn't been receiving more attention, although I suppose it only broke a couple of weeks ago. Permissions on profiles are set to retire in spring 26. So we haven't got to panic. We've got 3 years to worry about this. But these will be moving over to permission sets only, which is something that I think I've been hearing is on the way for can't be far off a decade now. So it's nice to see that it's actually happening. You get much more granularity on permission sets than profiles. They're much more usable. So it seems like the right way forward. There will be migration tools. You won't be left to fend for yourself on this. And as I say, it's spring 26. You've got plenty of time to prepare for it. If you want to find out more, then read Cheryl Feldman's blog post at the short link shown. She's the product manager on this, and this is something that she's very keen on pushing through. So this will happen. So next up, we have general changes. So I'm trying a more visual approach to the supported browsers this time around, rather than just reading stuff out or not reading stuff out and saying you can read it. There's no real surprises. Latest Chromium, Chrome, Edge Chromium, Firefox or Safari, apart from iPadOS. iPadOS, as you would expect, only supports Apple's Safari browser, but to even things up, the Safari browser isn't supported in the classic console app, so every browser gets an equal turn. Salesforce, as we know, they're going all in on multi-factor authentication, and they're going to start enabling this for you whether you want it or not. It's a little vague on the details. It's required for direct logins. This will happen through 2023 and eventually will be enforced. But we don't know exactly when that will happen. If you use single sign-on to access Salesforce, then you're contractually required to provide multi-factor authentication, but that isn't checked as part of the authentication process. And to be honest, I've no idea how you would go about checking that that had all happened before you got your token to be allowed in. But yeah, single sign-on is a really good thing to move to if you can do that. Otherwise, you're going to have to enable MFA. Next up, analytics. So this first feature I think is really nice, personalized report features, sorry, personalized report filters. So this, at the moment, these allow you to apply a filter that dynamically determines the current user. So it's a nice start, but it doesn't do an awful lot. So basically, here's an example from an opportunities report. I filter by opportunity owner. I click to choose relative value, and then it's the only option there is there, $user. But $user is basically whoever's running the report. So there's no kind, you don't have to do a report running user or anything like that. It'll dynamically figure out who you are and what opportunities you own, and it'll only show you those. So as I say, really nice start, and hopefully now they've put the groundwork in and got the framework that allows this to happen for the first one, we'll be seeing a lot more of these options going forward. You can now report on analytics subscriptions, so to see what is being sent where, as shown in this screen grab. So you can see who is subscribed to what and what will happen when. So this is available for subscriptions to Lightning reports, dashboards, and collections, which are a new thing we'll talk about shortly, CRM analytics lenses, and dashboards in Slack. It also allows you to view the notification conditions for CRM analytics dashboard widgets and Einstein discovery model quality alerts, if you have any of those configured. Other analytics enhancements, the subscription limits have been increased as well as being reportable. You can now subscribe to 15 reports and dashboards, up from 7. Lightning Report Builder now has feature parity with Classic. So the Edit in Classic button has been removed from the report actions in the Lightning experience. Obviously, if you haven't gone completely over to Lightning experience, you've still got the option of your users switching to Classic to go back to the old report builder. But allegedly, there's no reason to do that. They're not something I've investigated a huge amount, so it's possible there's still things that have been missed. Enhanced reports on mobile is generally available, and filtering report types by the objects and fields included in them is also generally available for up to 4 objects or up to 20 fields. So this is where you're looking for a report type, and you can either say what type of report it is, or you can say it needs to be this object or it needs to include this field, and it'll basically just show you report types that support that object or that field or combination thereof. And some other analytics enhancements, reports and dashboard collections. So these are quite nice. I mentioned this earlier on. This allows you to organize reports and dashboards from different folders into a single view. So if you've got things that need to live in their other folders because of sharing settings, etc., and you don't want to drop everything into one massive folder, maybe these are things that are regularly presented at board meetings but actually put together by different departments. So you enable the unified experience for Analytics Home to use this. Once you've done that, you access Analytics Home, click the plus button to create a new collection. You enter a few details about it, what its name is and what its purpose is. And then you can add in reports from various different places. So here you can see I've got my Spring 23 webinar collection. My demo collection, and when I go and view this collection, I see 2 items in there: the dashboard adoption webinar from marketing reports and the delivery team users from BrightGen reports. So I can see that almost like a folder, but without actually them having to live in the folder. They're just kind of weak references, I guess, off to where they really live, which I think is very nice. Next up is customization. So we mentioned about cleaning inactive pick lists being in beta, either in the last release or the release before. But the idea of this is it allows you to bulk delete unused items for custom pick lists with predefined values only. So as you can see in the screen grab on the right, in the inactive values section, you click the delete unused values button. This will present you with the consequences of your actions. And if you are happy to do this, you can click OK. Also, bulk management of pick list values is also GA, so you can see the bottom screen grab there. You can pick multiple values to delete, activate, deactivate, or replace, as opposed to the way it used to work was where you could pick one at a time and do something with that. Once again, this applies to custom pick lists with predefined values only. Inclusivity next. Pronouns and gender identity fields are optionally available for lead, contact and person accounts, basically anything tied to an individual person. There's a vetted set of defaults from Salesforce, or you can use your own. These are optional in the sense that they're not added to the page layouts, so you would need to add those in to use them. And obviously, if you are capturing this information, this is additional privacy, personally identifiable information you're capturing, so make sure you've considered the implications of that as well. Lightning App Builder has a couple of enhancements. Dynamic forms are now supported in case and lead record pages. Dynamic actions for standard objects are generally available for the desktop, and custom objects are generally available for desktop and mobile. And you can also customize the desktop forecast pages if you have specific needs around that. Mentioned PII a couple of slides ago. There's a personal identifiable information update in this release, and this stops external users accessing other users' PII. And it also stops them accessing their own. So make sure that this covers the appropriate fields for your use case, because you're going to hide this from people. There is a default field set which defines the fields that Salesforce consider PII, and your admins can then modify this to suit their needs. And you can also now see full details of who a record is shared with and why it's been shared and what level of access they have. So on a record, if you click on the one on the drop-down menu up on the top right and choose the sharing hierarchy option, that will show you which users have access. So here you can see it's me and my old friend Testy McTest, my faithful companion over quite a few of these webinars. If we click into my details, we can see the exact access that I have and why. I'm an administrator and also I own it, so it feels like I really should have access to that. Okay, moving on to always my favorite topic, development. This is a really nice feature on Lightning components. So basically they're becoming easier to find within the DOM in this release with the LWC:ref attribute. So this effectively allows you to supply something like an ID, but one that doesn't get changed by the platform like the ID attribute does. So you can access this in JavaScript just by using this .refs and then the ref name that you gave it. So in this case, in the snippet, it's user info. I can just get that element by doing this .refs.user info rather than having to rely on overloading data attributes or pulling it back by class selectors and the like. So this is much better. Shame it's taken us this long to get here, because we needed this kind of thing since Visualforce days, but the important things that we got there. There are new and more performant conditional directives that are going to replace the if true and if false directives, and these are LWC if, LWC else, and LWC else if. The old way is deprecated, and that will be removed in a future release, but we don't know when that will be. So here's a little example of what it looks like. I've got a template there, and if the say hello attribute is set to true, it'll output hello. If not, it will fall through to the else if. Is the say goodbye attribute true, then it will say goodbye. Otherwise, it will fall through to else and has nothing to say. Important thing to note here is that else if and else must be immediately preceded by the if or else if. Essentially what it's saying is that I couldn't put another element in between the template which has LWC if and the template which has LWC else if. I couldn't just drop a div in there. So it's effectively interpreted as a single statement. Apex next, user mode database operations are generally available. Something that ISVs are probably a bit more excited about than SIs or customers. If you aren't up to speed on these, they ensure your SOCL and DML respect the field level security and object permissions of the current user. They also apply sharing rules, which you've always been able to do with your with and without sharing. But respecting field level security and object permissions retires an awful lot of code that says things like is editable, is deletable, etc., etc. It makes sure that if the current user hasn't got those permissions, then the operation will fail. So for SOCL, you apply this via the with clause. So you can see here with user mode, while for DML, there's a new variant of the operation as user. So there you can see create a contact, insert as user contact. So you don't have to use those if you need to disregard these because you're running essentially in system mode and you do a system mode type operation, you just don't use them. But if you are thinking about becoming an ISV, this is the kind of thing that will help you pass the security review without having to put a whole ton of code in to manually check this kind of thing. So that'll be a great advantage. When enqueuing a job for asynchronous processing, if you know there's no point in running it before a specific amount of time has elapsed, you can now specify that. So the example here, the job will run. I've passed an additional parameter. I've got system.enqueue job. I've given it the class, a new instance of the class that implements the job. And I've passed an additional parameter of 5, which is the number of minutes I want to wait. So that delays, it schedules it, but it makes sure it doesn't run before at least 5 minutes have elapsed. And I can specify that between 0, which means run immediately or as quickly as possible, and 10 minutes. So if you know that I don't know, maybe you've fired some sort of external request, you know it's going to be a few minutes before it comes back, rather than going into this endless loop of poll, has it been done, no, back off for a minute, poll, has it been done, or trying to figure out with complex cron triggers exactly when you want to find it. You can just basically pass a parameter, say wait this long. And as part of this, there's also an all-wide default delay you can put in there of between, this is seconds granularity of between 1 and 600 seconds. So again, 10 minutes. If you know that every job you enqueue must wait at least a certain number of seconds, you could set this. I can't really think of a scenario where I might want that, but entirely possible. But you can also override the parameter on the enqueue job. So if you do have a situation where pretty much everything needs 2 minutes delay, but the odd one needs to fire as quickly as possible, you can manage that through a combination of all-wide default and then just overriding that with the odd enqueue job. The Apex type implementer is now generally available. So this allows you to identify which classes implement an interface at runtime. It might feel like a solution looking for a problem, but there are use cases for this, and I did write a blog post about exactly one of my use cases for this. It's on the beta version, the blog post, but nothing's really changed dramatically that I've seen in the documentation, so it still applies. I think this final point is a really interesting one as well. So this gives a lot of clarity around how things are going to be used within SOQL queries, etc., or how variables are going to be used within a module. So rather than binding in local variables or parameters that have been passed in, etc., you can now put everything that you're going to use in that query into a map and then pull them out by their name. So you can see in this example here, the string literal Acme Corporation has been bound to a variable effective on entry in the map with ACCT name. And I can then use that in my database query with binds. So like database query, specify binds where name equals colon ACCT name. So that will pull Acme Corporation and that will expand to Acme Corporation. And I also pass along the map with all the binds in there. So if you've got a number of those, it gives you a lot more clarity than just having a load of local variables, some of which are used in the SOQL query and some of which aren't. DevOps Center is now generally available. If you've been hiding under a rock and you haven't seen this, it's declarative development without change sets, or declarative deployment really without change sets. So you organize and check your changes via work items, a new object, automatic change tracking. So that's basically the source tracking API under the hood. Basically allows you to identify which changes, what has been changed, and you can then decide which changes to include in your deployment. You create your deployment package through clicks, but you're also integrated with source control. You do have to install a manage package to use this, and you can find out more about it at the short link. Some of the documentation does say this can all be done by admins with clicks not code, and then they say when there is a merge conflict, you need to get a developer to resolve that for you. Speaking as someone who used to be a developer, if my job turned into resolving other people's merge conflicts, I'm not sure how long I'd stick around and do that. So you'll be needing some cooperative developers if you go that route, I think. Flow Builder, this now allows you to view the description for an element directly in the builder, just by hovering over the little question mark icon you can see there. And there's also an improved flow element menu, which again you access by hovering over, but this time an exclamation mark icon. So this basically, yeah, it makes it, I think it's a lot more clarity again on the flow builder, which is always a good thing. Selecting multiple records from a table is now generally available in the flow runtime. And also the limit of 2,000 elements per transaction has been lifted, which is great news. However, this doesn't mean that flows can run an unlimited number of elements. So all of your other limits still apply. So the number of records that can be hit by a single transaction, etc., apply. And also the CPU limit, which is if you have a whole ton of elements in there, you're likely to start butting up against that. So that doesn't go away, but this kind of slightly artificial limit of 2,000, which did limit what you could do in a flow, has now gone. So that's really good. Moving on to experiences, aka communities, originally starting out as portals. In LWC, Lightning Web Component, and Aura sites, you can use the script tag to add structured search engine optimization data. And if you don't know what that is and you'd like to learn more about it, click on the short link or go to the short link shown, and that takes you to some really good Google documents which explain it all and why you might want to do that. The contact support form component is now available for sites built on the Lightning Web runtime. You can add alt text for images in the rich content editor component, and there are next and previous buttons available now for the grid component. Margins are also supported now for standard and custom components, while padding is supported for custom and some standard components not listed. This is kind of with margins and padding that is edging ever closer to the pixel perfect dream of being able to assemble something and have it all look exactly as you want through clicks, not code. On the performance side, you can now exceed the person account ownership limit if it makes sense for a single user to own a huge amount of external accounts, which does happen. You have to create a person account owner power user record for the user in question and associate it with their user ID. And you also have to make sure they're at the top level of the hierarchy. So there's A, no hierarchy sharing, and B, you don't move them out and cause a load of sharing recalculations. And if you're using micro batching, this now sends notifications when errors occur. And you can hopefully avoid more of those errors because you can now write Apex tests against your micro batching code if you're doing it programmatically. Moving on to Sales Cloud. First up, collaborative forecasting. As mentioned earlier, you can collaborate the forecast page using the Lightning App Builder. And you can also now forecast using custom date fields, whereas previously you were limited to the standard ones of close date, product date, or schedule date. So when you're creating a forecast type, you simply select the date field that you're interested in. There are some design updates to the collaborative forecasting page, as you can see here. So rattling through them, point one, the forecast range can be set directly on the page. So in this case, it's October FY 2022 to March FY 2023. Point two, the summary heading is blue, which doesn't seem like much, but it matches other features like pipeline inspection. So there's a bit more consistency there. Point three, over on the left there, the current period is indicated in the summary through the text current period, so that's nice and clear. Point four, down the bottom, the opportunities list now has more detail about what you're looking at, so it tells you that it's all forecast categories, it's showing it for this customer, this financial period, etc. Point five, if you have pipeline inspection, the button is now blue and easier to spot, and again, more consistent with how the rest of Salesforce is. Moving on to Service Cloud. First off, some case swarming improvements. So swarm reporting now includes the swarm's related records and also the swarm members' works and skills. So that's, yes, you can see the kind of people you're collaborating with and who might be able to do what. And when you start a swarm, you can choose the skills or define the skills that candidate members need before they're allowed to join the swarm. So that's quite useful. You can make sure you've got appropriately accredited people. Routing next, when you define skills to filter work items or agents, you can now require all of them or stick with the previous method of any one or more. You can notify agents via browser alerts of things that they need to get on with. Agents have to enable this. You can't just take control of their browser, which seems pretty fair. Supervisors can now reassign agents to queues. And once you've got your supervisor configuration set up, you can now deploy that via change sets or packages rather than having to recreate manually. Knowledge. There is a knowledge dashboard pack for CRM analytics available from the App Exchange. And the beauty of this is you don't need an analytics license to view, just to edit on those. This includes draft articles in its reporting, which is also a nice benefit. And you can now change or add record types even if the article is a translated one. And finally, cases. Lightning threading for email to case is available. Now, this matches on tokens and headers, so it should be more accurate. And you can enable this via setup email to case settings. And you can also now log a call directly from the activities component rather than having to go elsewhere. So this brings us to the end of the regular programming. So those that have been with us for a few of these in the past will have noticed that in some of the clouds there weren't a vast amount of new features. And I think that's because a lot of features are going through a beta phase first. So we've got a few more than normal to talk about this time. So you can configure Einstein search field by profile. So you have to enable this via setup Einstein search manager. Then you create a config setting for the profile. So in this case, it's system administrator. And then you can choose the objects and fields that should be searchable for this profile. So real granularity available there, which I think is something we can all look forward to. Another great one for the developers, Lightning Web Security is in beta for Aura components in the Lightning Experience and Experience Cloud sites. So you have to enable this through setup session settings Lightning Web Security. But it does mean that you won't have the locker service around anymore, which I think can only be a good thing. Make sure to test this in a sandbox, and also note that you can evaluate the JavaScript that will be executed by LWS in the Lightning Web Security console. So you can't actually kind of directly invoke components and the like, but if you're seeing an issue, you can evaluate some JavaScript and see what happens directly in the console. Something that I and many other Lightning Web Component developers have been after for a while. The refresh view API is now in beta. So this allows you to refresh component data without reloading the page. This applies to Aura and Lightning Web Components, and also to the Salesforce kind of standard platform components and custom components. So this will replace the force refresh view in Aura. And what it says, what the docs say, is it will give you more flexibility around what refreshes. Haven't actually seen an awful lot of detail around this yet, but it'd be really nice if you could specify what you want to be refreshed when you invoke this API, wouldn't it? And then get truly reactive pages. Field level security is in permission sets rather than profiles is in beta. This is obviously the first step in preparation for retirement of permissions on profiles that I mentioned right back on about their second or third slide. You have to enable this in setup user management. And when you do that, you set the field level security at the permission set rather than the profile level. Now, you can't switch between these without toggling the setting backwards and forwards. So it's an all or none. So yeah, and there is not going to be any capability to manage both of them at the same time because Salesforce want to move away from profiles. A few beta features for Lightning Web Runtime Experience sites. An action bar component that allows you to create a custom set of actions for object detail pages. A notifications component that's kind of your notification center, a one-stop shop for any notifications that you've received, but also customizable to your brand. And a record detail component that allows you to view and edit records, but that also inherits the formatting from the site branding. So hopefully something you can just drop in and it kind of looks like the rest of your site. In Flow, reactive components are in beta. So this is always one of the use cases that I felt Flow wasn't handling very well because it forced you down always force you down a wizard route, so you had to commit transactions even though you might not be ready to commit that transaction as you switch between screens. So I was always writing Lightning Web Components to allow them to interact with each other, to send messages to each other. And you can do some of that with the Lightning App Builder as well, wiring them together. But flow reactive components are going into beta in this release. And these allow components to react to changes to other components made on the same flow screen element. So no need to move on to the next screen in order to change the view. This is available for custom Lightning Web components and supported components. And that's in quote marks because I couldn't find any details about what the supported components are. You have to opt in via setup process automation settings, opt into the beta, and there is also a chatter group with a bit more information that you can find at the short link shown. That chatter group was around the developer preview, I think. So I'm not sure how active it's going to be now, but there's some useful historic information in there. There's also a new flow choice lookup component that allows you to filter from a list rather than having to search or scroll, and this supports all choice resources. And a few other beta features. With all of these, you can't opt in yourself. You need to contact Salesforce support to enable them. Enhanced Lightning dashboards with text and graphics. So this allows you just to kind of drop in explanations, logos, things like that. They don't have to be particular, they're not generated from any data. You can just drop them where you need. So if you need a bit more explanation or something like that, you can definitely do that there. Lightning dashboard filters can be increased from 3 to 5. I'm guessing that feels like a really strange thing to have to contact Salesforce support. So I'm guessing there's some implications around that you'll need to be prepared for, and maybe it's not suitable for everyone. And you can recalculate account sharing rules faster using virtual implicit case shares. So this is a new kind of sharing. And what it does is it also has a side effect that it grants view and edit for the account owner and users the account is shared with on records owned by high volume experienced cloud owners. So basically, there will just be some additional implicit sharing that you might not be expecting, but it will recalculate a lot quicker. So if that is a problem that you're looking to solve, this could be the right way of doing it. Just make sure that you're ready for the side effect. This brings us to the end of the generally available and beta features. Once again, thanks very much everyone for all your attention. As always, there's the Salesforce release readiness, the short link shown. There's release in a box, which includes release notes, demo videos, and more. There's also a Trailhead badge. I'm always impressed by how early they get the Trailhead badges out. They seem to have all of that content ready in a long way in advance of a lot of those features hitting sandboxes and the like. So yeah, well done Team Trailhead again. And also obviously in that Trailhead badge you can learn about some of the features that we didn't cover today, because as always we target it more at our customers than trying to cover the whole of the 550 odd pages of release notes, which would definitely keep us here all day. So in the spirit of not keeping people here all day, that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm just going to have a look down and see if we have any questions. Subscription limits for report and dashboards, isn't that only for unlimited edition? That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to go and look at the release notes and check that. So we'll put a reply out to everyone who came along today. That appears to be the only question that we have here. So once again, thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope to see you at the next one, which should be probably early June 2023. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Thanks for coming.